What's happening, people? It's Ryan Taylor again, and before we get started, I just want to say a quick shout out and thank you to anybody who follows me on Twitter. Obviously it's the platform that I'm probably most active on, but today I clocked up 10,000 followers, which I know followers don't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but obviously for a journalist it's a good platform to drive your work across, and it shows, there's people interested in the stories that I'm producing. So like I said, big thank you. If you're not following me, go over to Twitter and my handle is @RyanTaylorSport. I'd also like to just say a quick thank you as well to everyone who supported my YouTube videos so far. I think I've done 3, but the views been really genuinely pleased with. Obviously this is a work in progress, my YouTube, but I've really enjoyed it so far. But obviously there is only 5 or 6 days now to go in the transfer window, and the videos and my column will all stop until the summer once that window has closed. So my column dropped this morning, Tuesday. It is now Tuesday evening. It dropped this morning at 9 AM. So we're going to be running through some of the stories that I wrote about in my column, as well as a few bonus developments that have happened throughout the course of the day. But before we get started, if you're only interested in your club, or there's a player you're particularly interested in this video, if you scroll along the bottom here, that is going to be all the times in the description. If you can't see the little time frame sectioned divider thing, go down to the description and you can skip to what minute and second I'm talking about your club. We're going to do a big video tonight. I was going to wait until later in the week, but so much has happened and so much is changing. I think we could potentially have more videos this week before the deadline on Monday. I'm going to be working flat out until the deadline, and then, like I've mentioned in previous videos, going to take a massive break and probably sleep for a couple of weeks once it's shut. So we're going to start with Tottenham. Now, I had a lot of information on Tottenham in my column earlier today, but there's been a big development this evening. Spurs have moved for Porto winger Luis Díaz, Colombian international, a player that Liverpool and Everton have shown interest in the past 12 months. Now, Díaz was actually the subject of potential swap deal talks between Everton and Porto last summer that would have seen James Rodriguez move the other way to the Dragão. Obviously, he used to play there before he went to Monaco, just before his move to Real Madrid. But Luis Díaz is a player on Tottenham's radar, and Spurs reps were actually in Portugal today to present a formal proposal. This is as per Fabrizio Romano, of around about £40 million plus £8 million in add-ons. Now, Díaz has a release clause in the region of £67 million, but the way Spurs are trying to structure this deal really does have Fabio Paratici written all over it. Obviously, he arrived last summer to become the club's technical director, and the way he operates is he likes to structure deals with add-ons or certain bonuses that would, in a way, kind of see Tottenham not pay as much up front to begin with. So it's kind of a clever negotiating tactic, which actually sees selling clubs believe, they're receiving a significant amount of money, but there's no guarantee the buying club will actually pay all of that money due to the add-ons included in the deal. Now, as I understand it, Díaz is one of the targets on Tottenham's radar that they're currently working on. There's a few more that are still ongoing and have the potential to develop in the next couple of days. But Porto are holding out for the release clause, the £67 million release clause. They're not really interested in negotiating that low for a player that's pretty much in the form of his career, and he's slowly sort of developing into one of the best wide forwards in Europe. Some of the goals he scored, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to see any of his goals or best, highlights or highlights reel. But this guy can beat a man, and he can also score from range and distance. He scored quite a few unbelievable goals, really, in the Champions League. Not least one against Manchester City, where he skinned the whole defence. And his long shots are really good. Sort of hits the top corner, like he scored quite a few that flown in off the post and the bar. So the idea with Díaz would obviously, for one of those roles behind Kane, in the sense that you could have a 3-4-3 with Son and Díaz in support of Kane. Conte is kind of hell-bent on adding another forward to the squad. Obviously, last summer, they didn't sign Carlos Vinicius on a permanent deal. But the idea here would probably see Tottenham shelve plans for another centre-forward and sort of stick to that 3-4-3 system as opposed to the 3-4-1-2 with a number 10, so to speak. Obviously, Lucas Moura and Steven Bergwijn are still part of Tottenham's plans. Although, like I said, Spurs don't want to sell Bergwijn. If they bought in Díaz, there is a chance they could potentially pick up negotiations again with Ajax, who just won't go away for Bergwijn. They really want to sign him, having sold David Neres to Shakhtar Donetsk. So, yeah, Díaz is an interesting one to keep an eye on. I think at the moment it's a deal Tottenham are currently exploring, but I think we'll kind of find out quickly whether it's going to happen or not. You know, Tottenham are not really seriously testing Porto's resolve. This is another example of them sort of showing ambition in the market, but once again, there's kind of a reluctance to spend big. You know, Daniel Levy is notorious for kind of trying to work sort of cunningly in the market, in the sense that he's not just going to be held to ransom and overpay for targets. He will walk away from the table, and so will Spurs if they, you know, don't think they're getting a fair deal, or they don't think they're signing a target at the right price. They're not someone that's going to give in to pressure like Manchester United have done on several occasions with the likes of Jadon Sancho and Harry Maguire. So Díaz is one to keep an eye on, but there's another deal that Spurs are actually close to agreeing, and that is Sofyan Amrabat from Fiorentina. Now, I know a lot of Tottenham fans have sort of taken this news, not lightly, but they're not best pleased with the situation, given that Amrabat hasn't been a guaranteed starter this season for Fiorentina since they signed Lucas Torreira on loan from Arsenal. Now, he's a holding midfield player, but in the past sort of 2 years, scrapping this year, he's actually been one of the best midfielders in Serie A. He really caught the eye when he was at Hellas Verona. He's had spells in Holland before moving to Club Brugge as well. But he's still a player that's got room for development. He's only 25. And the idea here is just to bring another option into midfield for Tottenham. See, we've seen this season, Harry Winks has come back into form. But besides Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, there hasn't really been a standout starting midfielder. Oliver Skipp's had his moments, of course. But ultimately, a move could hinge on the future of Tanguy Ndombele. There has been swap deal talks with both Paris Saint-Germain and Roma over the player. PSG were offering Leandro Paredes in return for the Frenchman, and Paris Saint-Germain does look like the most likely option for Ndombele. Obviously, it would see him reunite with former boss Mauricio Pochettino at the club. But Roma are also keen. Obviously, Jose Mourinho's worked with Ndombele before at Tottenham. Gave that famous training session in the park during lockdown in 2020. Didn't really get the best from him, but started to really develop Ndombele in this season when he was sacked in the early stages of that. Seem to remember a really great performance away at Manchester United in which he scored in the 6-1 win. So Roma would be interested in Ndombele as well, but I think it's Jordan Veretout they'd potentially be willing to offer to go the other way. But for now, Spurs are fixated on working on that deal with PSG. So with Amrabat, they're looking at a loan with an option to buy, and I think the total package would be worth around about £15 million. The player is currently away at the Africa Cup of Nations with Morocco. I think Morocco are playing Malawi tonight at time of recording, which is Tuesday evening. So we'll see what happens there. I think Spurs want a deal in place now. They're kind of cautious that they've not brought any recruits through the door before the transfer window closes. Sort of, you know, we're getting to the crunch stages of the window now. So Adama Traore is still a work in progress. There's still confidence a £20 million deal will be completed in the coming days. Wolves are kind of a bit tentative to sell, only because Bruno Lage has sort of made it clear that he doesn't feel like selling players like Adama always pays off. You know, the thinking with the Wolves board is that if they sell Adama now, he's only got 18 months left on his contract. His value is only going to decrease from here on in. So it's a chance to potentially free up some funds to reinvest. But Spurs' spending power could ultimately hinge on exits, and that's something I touched upon in this morning's column. Now, there's around about 6 players that could potentially leave Tottenham. So obviously Ndombele we've touched upon. Joe Rodon is another player who could depart. Newcastle were thought to be interested in a loan deal, but that hasn't quite happened. Matt Doherty is also available. And then you have Bryan Hill, who hasn't quite hit the ground running since he arrived from Sevilla. See, he joined as part of that player plus cash deal that saw Eric Lamela go to Sevilla. I think it was £21.6 million that Tottenham paid as part of the package. Now, Valencia, Real Sociedad and Nice in France are interested in taking him on loan. There's a chance he could depart in the coming days. Alternatively, you've got Dele Alli, who has pretty much been shown the door now after being left out of the squad to face Chelsea last Sunday. And Newcastle are eyeing him as a potential alternative to Jesse Lingard. Other Premier League clubs could potentially join the race as well. And then you have Giovanni Lo Celso, who they signed from Real Betis for around about £55 million from Real Betis in 2019 as sort of long-term replacement for Christian Eriksen, but he's been really disappointing actually. And there's talk Sevilla could potentially be interested in signing him. But as we'll come on to later, he's one of the players that are their situations have been complicated by this sporadic January international break that's been introduced to ensure CONMEBOL, CONCACAF and Asian countries can fulfil their World Cup qualifiers. So they've had quite a few cancelled due to travel restrictions and COVID. So they needed to cram in some games this month. So there's quite a few players who are away on international duty in South America, for example, that could potentially be on the move. So Lo Celso's situation is a bit difficult because Spurs want to offload, but they may struggle to do that because he's currently preoccupied with World Cup qualifiers. So that's the situation with Tottenham as I understand it. Things can move quickly, as I've discussed. And today there's been, huge movement on the front of Amrabat and also Luis Díaz, which has really burst into life this evening. And I do expect more developments on that in terms of potentially revised offer or Porto to make their stance clear on a sale. I'm going to move on now, though, to Everton, of really a club in absolute, not disarray, but limbo as such. So the idea was that Rafa Benitez would be strongly backed in the January transfer window. And we saw that, really put into action with the signings of Vitaly Markolenko and Nathan Patterson from Rangers. Interestingly, both were not in the squad for Duncan Ferguson's first game in charge as caretaker boss versus Aston Villa last week. But Everton were really going to crack on with a number of signings, and there was a number of players that were on their radar following discussions with Benitez. Those include Alexander Golovin from Monaco, Ibrahim Sangare from PSV Eindhoven, who's currently playing really well at the African Cup of Nations, and Dwight McNeil, who's obviously a player I've touched upon as well in previous videos. But the situation they have now is that Everton are fed up of wasting cash, and ultimately they want any new signings to be players that fit the project of the new manager. So they're in a difficult position at the moment. Obviously they're focusing their efforts on the appointment of a new boss. Vitor Pereira has been the latest manager to hold talks with the club on Merseyside. There has also been interest in Kovac. Frank Lampard is set to be interviewed. Wayne Rooney is another name under consideration. Obviously, you've had Roberto Martinez in the running. But really, Everton want to kind of get a new manager in place ASAP, although they're not going to rush into a decision because they understand the next manager. They need to get it right because they're sick of falling behind the rest of the top 6, the top 8 clubs. They're getting dragged into a bottom half, almost relegation scrap, It's pretty desperate down at the bottom at the moment. So that is the situation. Everton are kind of reluctant to spend this month, knowing that, ultimately there's a chance new players might not be part of the new manager's thinking. But that's not to say they're not open to opportunities. I know Mazraoui, the Ajax right back, is a player that's been lined up for the summer as the right back. Obviously, they want to bring in another right back, even though they've signed Patterson. They want someone who could potentially slot straight into the team, with Seamus Coleman expected to take up a more experienced role within the squad, sort of as a squad player and leader from the outside, sort of what we saw from Leighton Baines in his final years. I know Max Aarons is a player of interest from Norwich as well, so it'd be interesting to see what happens with him. But don't expect movement in terms of a right back this month. So at the moment, Everton are really sort of in limbo, although they remain open to opportunities, particularly with sort of younger players, which, are a much more safer recruitment strategy, as opposed to sort of lumping money on the likes of Davy Claess and those kind of signings that just really Everton have made too many of over the years. They need players that they can coach and develop, the likes of Nikola Vlasic and Ademola Lookman that they've signed in the past but haven't quite been able to maximise their potential. So that's where Everton stand at the moment. And one player that would probably be of interest to him this summer is Armanda Broja, who's obviously flourishing on loan at Southampton from Chelsea. And I wrote in my column this morning that Premier League clubs are now starting to take interest in Broja's performances. He was really, really good on Saturday in the 1-1 draw against Manchester City. Caused Ruben Diaz and Aymeric Laporte all kinds of problems, sort of really showing a real maturity and sort of bullish approach as for a 20-year-old. There was a lot of physical promise, and he was really sort of leading the line in exemplary fashion for Southampton. And they want to sign him on a permanent deal. Obviously, that's no secret. Ralph Hasenhüttl has already confirmed that talks are ongoing behind the scenes with Chelsea over a permanent deal. But Thomas Tuchel is a really big fan of Broja. He was really impressed with him pre-season. I think he scored against Bournemouth in one of the pre-season friendlies. So, he's very much open to keeping the player, and especially given Chelsea's current striker situation. Obviously, they sold Tammy Abraham to Roma. It's currently a decision that they might be living to regret, given the start he's made to life in Serie A. But also, Romelu Lukaku is just not... what's going on there? Not sure what was happening there. Romelu Lukaku is just not living up to expectations since his club record £97.5 million move. So Chelsea are opening to strengthening in attack, but they are going to be braced for offers this summer for Broja. And, ultimately it's going to put them in a position where they need to decide what they want to do with him. The player wants to play regularly after having a taste of top flight action with Southampton this season. So they're going to be forced into sort of deciding what they want to do with him. Whether to keep him or whether to loan him out again or whether to potentially sell him, because they could earn a significant payday, probably around about £20 to £25 million for Broja. So it will be interesting to see how that one develops. And moving on now to Aston Villa, who obviously have had a really efficient window so far that has really highlighted the impact of Steven Gerrard. They've landed Felipe Coutinho on loan from Barcelona, Lucas Digne from Everton, and Robin Olsen as a backup keeper. Now, I understand two more signings are on the agenda. One being a centre-back, sort of someone who can provide healthy competition and cover for Tyrone Mings and Ezri Konsa. And then central midfield as well. Gerrard's openings for some extra strength and some extra quality. Obviously, Yves Bissouma is a player of significant interest. There has been dialogue with Brighton, who have sort of made it clear they're not interested in selling the player, but he does have 18 months left on his contract, which will surely be something that the Seagulls take into account if they receive any offers. Bissouma's unlikely to sign an improved deal. He wants to take his game to the next level by playing Champions League football. So he really does fit the Villa ilk, but a number of top six sides are also showing interest in his services. And obviously Rodrigo Bentancur is of huge interest to Villa. There has been discussions with Juventus over a deal. It's believed it'd cost around about £20 million, but Juve don't really want to weaken their squad at the moment, due to the fact they would prefer to sell Aaron Ramsey, who's been offered around to the likes of Burnley, Crystal Palace and Wolves, but none of them seem to be willing to take a chance on the Welshman, who has obviously had a really established career with Arsenal and the Wales national team as well. Newcastle were also offered Ramsey, but not interested in signing him. So that's the current state of play with Villa, Bentancur and Bissouma, the two top midfield targets, and I would expect movement on one of those fronts before the end of the transfer window. There's money to spend, and Gerrard's has really sort of made a push to strengthen the club this month in the fact that, in the sense and with the view that Villa could be competing for sort of top 6 next season if they use the second half of this season as a real opportunity to grow and develop. There has been finally some movement at Burnley, who have obviously lost Chris Wood to Newcastle this month. I reported in my last video that Mislav Oršić was on the agenda and there were talks held with Dynamo Zagreb, but we now understand there has been a breakthrough today. Talks are now advanced between all parties, and it looks like Burnley are set to seal a £7 million deal for Oršić, which is a snip, and there's been a lot of positive praise for this negotiation on Twitter today. A lot of people saying sort of what a steal for Burnley. He is 29, Oršić, but as he's shown against the English clubs he's faced with Dinamo Zagreb, he's a good player. He scored a hat-trick against Tottenham in the Europa League last season. Scored a stunner against West Ham in the Europa League group stages earlier this season, I think in December. And Oršić is not the only name on the agenda for Burnley. Now, they still want another forward, ideally a striker, centre-forward, and also a central midfield player. I know Armand Broja is a player of interest. He'd probably cost around about £10 million. He's a player who can play predominantly out wide, but he can also play sort of as an attacking midfielder as well. Obviously, at Burnley are very traditional with their 4-4-2, but Loriente is one of the names that has been considered, and there's also interest in Angers' Angelo Fulgini, who is also sort of a central midfield player with a more of an attacking side to his game. Very dynamic player who likes to contribute in the final third with goals and assists. And as I've talked about in previous videos and in my column, Burnley are very much exploring the European market. Not had much luck in the Premier League with negotiating with fellow English clubs, but they feel there's bargains to be had in Europe. You know, why pay sort of 15 to 20 million for a big prospect from the Championship when you can sign, you know, one of these kind of not unpolished gems, but, you know, players that are going beneath the radar in leagues like Ligue 1 and, you know, even the Croatian league, you know, to pick up Oršić, who's someone that has done it at international level as well. It's a really good move from Burnley, and, you know, with all these games in hand, if they bring in some top additions this month, there's every chance it could benefit them further down the line. And just finally, in terms of actual deals, Brighton's move for Julio Enciso, who's a Paraguayan wonder kid, effectively, is edging closer. Understand a £6 million deal is close now with Club Libertad in Paraguay. We touched upon this in a previous video. But once again, Brighton really using their South American scouting network that's seen them land the likes of Moises Caicedo and Alexis McAllister. He's a player that could potentially stay in South America on loan for the time being, but certainly down the line he'll be introduced to Graham Potter's side and they'll look to develop him and take him to the next level. Just finally, some bits on vaccinations and the international break. Obviously, vaccines are, I appreciate they're a really sort of subject that not many people want to talk about for a number of reasons. Either you've got conflicting views on the situation with vaccines, or whether you're anti-vax or with the jab. But furthermore, it's actually quite boring, you know, to talk about vaccines. But in terms of the transfer window, they are of significance now. Steven Gerrard and Patrick Vieira have been among the managers to mention that vaccination statuses will be taken into account when considering transfer targets. Now, on current government guidelines in the United Kingdom, which are set to change after the window closes on February 11th, the new rules come into play. unvaccinated players would have to isolate for 10 days upon arrival in England. So effectively, it rules out unvaxxed players arriving before the deadline from Europe or elsewhere. You know, if they were to, you know, agree a deal, then anyone without a vaccination would have to isolate, and therefore, you know, the formalities such as medicals, etc., couldn't be completed. The only way around that would be to conduct a medical overseas in a foreign country. But obviously the player would still then have to complete a period of isolation upon arrival in the UK, and, you know, effectively 10 days is quite a long time to be missing for, even though, you know, long term they will be with the club. So that's one of the situations with vaccines. And then the other sort of disruption that Premier League clubs are facing, particularly Tottenham, West Ham and Leeds, which we'll come on to in a second, is the international break, which I mentioned earlier in the video, in the sense that a lot of countries are now fulfilling World Cup qualifiers in the next week and a half. Obviously, Lo Celso is a player that's affected by that. You know, even Luis Díaz, who's away with Colombia, can't really sort of fly into London to conduct a medical with Spurs because he's away playing matches. So any medical checks and things like that would probably be done by the Colombian national team or Argentine national team, in the sense of if Lo Celso was going to move. You know, these kind of arrangements are quite common, to be honest. It's not something that is going to completely derail a deal, but obviously it's just another hurdle to overcome. The other ones I wanted to mention is Brenden Diaz, obviously complete revelation with Blackburn and now Chile, really becoming somewhat of a cult hero with La Roja, which is the Chilean national team. He's joined up with his country for World Cup qualifiers. He actually plays against Argentina on Friday, I think it is. West Ham are interested in Diaz, and they are kind of looking at the possibility of bringing in a striker and centre-back before the deadline closes. Now, Brenden Diaz is obviously away, like I mentioned, with Chile, so I wouldn't expect him to move, in all honesty. Just a bite on Blackburn, actually. Josh Maja is a player they're interested in, and Bordeaux are willing to get rid of him to clear the decks as part of their plan to combat financial struggles. So he's one that could arrive at Ewood Park and could potentially join up with Brenden Diaz. And just finally, I know Leeds fans have taken quite a lot of interest, particularly in my previous video, on Brenden Aaronson. So time for a big update on him. So as I understand it, got quite a lot of stick for saying this, but Salzburg once again are just not willing to budge despite a improved offer from Leeds. They bid initially around about £18 million, I think it was, for Aaronson, then up their offer to 20 million. But Salzburg are genuine that they do not want to sell any of their key players before the Champions League knockout clash with Bayern Munich. So Aaronson is going to have to wait. But furthermore, he's also away with the United States national team. And as I've just touched upon, it's, you know, a real problem and hurdle to overcome for these clubs looking at signing players that are currently away on international duty. It's just not really viable to conclude a deal in such a short space of time. I think United States are playing El Salvador and Canada, it might be. So Aaronson is focused on World Cup qualifiers, and he actually did have something to say on Leeds' interest. And, you know, unfortunately, it wasn't sort of anything too positive. It was more, you know, I'm not prepared to talk about interest from Leeds. I just want to focus on the task ahead with the United States and ensuring they have a strong World Cup qualification campaign before Qatar 2022. Just wanted to elaborate on Leeds' interest as well. You know, Aaronson is very much a player that is part of their long-term recruitment strategy. It's not a case where they'll move on to other targets, although they do want to sign players this window to bolster Marcelo Bielsa's squad. But it's easy to see why Aaronson is so highly regarded by the Leeds hierarchy. He has covered the most distance, more distance than any other player in this season's Champions League, with 72k. He's averaging 13k a game, which is just absolutely absurd. I think the average player averages around 11, something like that. And he's in the top 1% worldwide for distance covered. So, you know, in terms of Bielsa's murder ball and pressing, you know, he really would be the perfect fit. And furthermore, he's also got huge technical qualities and skill and potential to grow, But I just think a deal will be revisited in the summer when Salzburg will be definitely more, more open to a sale and doing business. They're not someone who's going to keep a player against their will or ever stand in a player's way from developing and, achieving a dream of playing in the Premier League. So I do expect that deal to potentially be done, but it's just, looks unlikely this month. And that is everything. As I said, there is a chance I'll be back before deadline day, breaking down some more stories. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on now. I really anticipate, from the agents and stuff I speak to, they're expecting, a mad scramble as always, but even more so because, clubs do genuinely need the players. Clubs like Newcastle are really shopping around for opportunities. At the moment, they're kind of being, they've had, they're being held to ransom, really being sort of mugged off in a way, because clubs are really sort of demanding significant fees from Newcastle because they know there's money to spend. Whereas other clubs are sort of operating with a more strategic approach, like Burnley. We could even see the likes of Watford do a bit more business now. Roy Hodgson's been appointed as their manager. Tottenham are really up in the ante. Everton could still do business. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting. As always, leave a like, leave a comment, hit the subscribe button. Follow me on Twitter at Ryan Taylor Sport. Keep up to date with all the latest transfer news on Express Sport. You can also subscribe to our transfer newsletter, which goes around daily, sending the likes of my story straight to your inbox. And I'll speak to you all soon.